Senator, I wouldn't be alone in saying that many people feel as if their freedoms are being curtailed under the excuse of catastrophic climate change. You can't travel, you can't eat meat, you can't vote for Conservatives. But we now hear that the Environment Minister, Tania Plibersek, has warned the clothing industry that it must turn its back on fast fashion and has considered intervening. Now, setting aside the reality that fast fashion is the domain of the young and poor, where cheap retail outlets allow those who earn less to feel better about, fitting in and buying cheap clothes. This doesn't exactly represent a good sign for Australia. Is this a frightening overreach of the government reaching its claws into the private business? And what right does Plibersek have to interfere in the fashion industry?
Well, that's an unusual word for you to use, Alexandra. Slight. It's more than slight. It's right over the top. Tania Plibersek is basically trying to justify a 4% tax on clothing, in addition to the GST's 10%. And what's more, she wants to limit the amount of clothing that people can buy. And they're also talking about, I talked about in Senate estimates, talking about how many times you can wash your clothes. So they want us to wear fewer clothes and wear them longer and dirtier. That's basically what they're doing. It's control, Alexandra, control again.
Well, I mean, they always talk about this as being an environmental thing. Oh, the clothing industry is destroying the planet. There's so much carbon involved in transporting it, but it always comes back down to money, as you so correctly point out. And this will involve a mandatory contribution to the Green Fund for every piece of clothing a manufacturer makes. Now, this will force the price of clothing upwards, and so poor people won't be able to afford stuff. And then there's this 4% tax on clothing. Are we really saying that parents are going to have a 4% increase in their clothing to send their kids to school?
Well, that's essentially correct. And what's more, we know that kids are growing so quickly sometimes in some parts of their growth that they might need 2 or 3 sets of clothing in 1 year. Add 4% to all of that. Now, what happens if you've got 3 children at school age, all needing uniforms? Add 4% to that. And, it is a tax that's highly regressive because it'll affect the poor much more than the rich. And that's what's so unjust about this, apart from the fact that it's based on a lie, as you know, Alexandra. Tania Plibersek says that I think she said up to 10% of carbon dioxide production comes from the clothing. No, she said from the fashion industry. See how they use the language already? Whereas what we saw in an ABC article, only 4 to 8% of carbon dioxide production. So she hasn't got the figures right for a start, but even then, assuming the figures are correct, who cares? Carbon dioxide is a wonderful plant food. It's aerial fertilizer. It's essential for all life on this planet. And what they're doing is using it to justify an extra tax that'll hit the poor and hit school children.